also seeing some of these things from Disney Plus finding their way to linear platforms such as ABC and Freeform.
Yeah, there has been a renewed interest on live and linear. How has that been affecting your businesses?
I can jump in here to start. I was just going to build on that anyway. With the live is sort of what, be it sports, be it music, be it whatever it is, that appointment viewing, those are kind of the last bastions of it. And as it moves increasingly to streaming, with the example with Disney Plus or with Amazon Thursday Night Football, which Nielsen measures, or YouTube TV just winning Sunday Ticket, or whatever it is, this is increasingly going to streaming, which is really important for how we think about content distribution, ad strategies, and measurement, really, because what we need to do as an industry and as we want the industry to serve us as consumers, which is follow us seamlessly across those things. So this move and this shift of live appointment viewing to streaming platforms, I think, is only going to superpower that growth of streaming, because those events really do drive a huge amount of consumption. If you look at November, for example, there was a big spike in broadcast consumption, and that's because it was the NFL playoffs. So people were tuning in disproportionately. And you go back to a month where there's not a live sports event drawing in all those eyeballs, and you go back to a state where actually streaming is the dominant use of television. So if you combine those two things and start putting some of these live appointment, exciting, big viewership programs into streaming, on top of the fact that streaming is the dominant consumer preference anyway, you're in a world really where I absolutely agree, Andrea, that traditional television becomes supplemental to the dominant, which is streaming. And really, if we step back again and just think about consumers, it's all television. I never sit down and want to watch some streaming or some linear. We just sit down to watch TV.
I'm glad you said shift, because that's really the word. Where we sit, we have a satellite service that we've lost distribution. We have a streaming service it's growing significantly with DirecTV Stream. And I think that's really indicative of the marketplace, because most distributors have a streaming product that looks very much like their linear product. And it has about the same usage, which is about 3.5 hours of viewership a day. And by the way, when you aggregate all of them on the streaming side, all the distributors, you add in YouTube TV and Hulu Live, you end up with about the same amount of households that have churned out of the linear space. So the consumers have spoke. They want live news and sports, and it's the same as 10 years ago. It's just shifted to a different delivery system.
I agree with that. For us, the World Cup, which we have exclusive Spanish language rights until 2026. This last 2022 World Cup was a huge success, with double-digit growth across the board in viewership, in advertising revenue. It was a perfect collaboration between live and streaming. And it was an instance of live driving audience to streaming. So what we did is, and this is our mantra, deliver quality content to our consumer wherever the consumer is. So on linear, whether that's on free or on basic cable, as well as on our streaming platform. And what we did was introduce a new audience to Peacock, because they were able to watch the World Cup on Peacock, but then we had compelling content for them to watch, new, interesting, innovative content that was being created and curated by our content hub, T+, and invited them to stay, to sample, to look at that content, as well as to look at additional Peacock content and to stay there as well. So I think for me, the World Cup was a perfect example of how live and streaming can work well together and can basically help each other grow. I also think that there is still a world where live exists and where live can grow. And as you mentioned, it's news, it is sports, but we have the World Cup every 4 years, and we unfortunately don't have the luxury of having an event like that as often as we'd like. So what we do is, on the news front, we make sure that the storytelling that we do, that the information that we provide is authentic, is one, trustworthy and reliable, but also speaks to our viewers, as we were talking about the different types of viewers. And then also on shows that are more interesting watched live, like La Casa de los Famosos, which for us is the Spanish version of Big Brother, and it's done very, very well on live. And this is the third season coming up in January. It's content that you want to watch at that moment. So yes, it's going to put a burden on us to make sure that that content continues to be different. And I don't want to keep overusing the word compelling, but it's trying to come up with something that an audience that is used to so much great quality content, wherever and whenever they want to see it, will come to you.
That's a great example. What about, as we're making this transition from traditional TV to streaming, or shift, I guess is the word we used. What are you seeing in terms of advertiser needs and differences in how things used to be versus today in a streaming world? What are advertisers' needs? How are they changing?
I can start there. In some ways, I don't think their need has changed. Advertisers are always seeking to reach their target audience at the right time in the right place. That I think never will change. What's changed is the complexity of the landscape in which they're trying to do that. And what I mean by that is it's linear and streaming, but it's also mobile versus computer versus your television screen or whatever it is. So the complexity has increased manifold. Put on top of that, all of the changes in the privacy landscape and how we as consumers no longer want our data necessarily shared that way, and cookies have gone away. So the ability now to find this person across this plethora of content, across this plethora of platforms, in the absence of the identifiers that we used to use to understand how to find my target advertiser, has gone poof. So what that means is you're still trying to find the same people, but you now really need to find a way to activate your target audience consistently across lots of different platforms, find them in a consistent way, and then measure that in a consistent way so that you can understand whether your campaign performed in the way that you wanted it to. And what that really means, tying it back to what we as Nielsen are trying to do as we serve that need, which is both an advertiser need and also a publisher need as well, because it's really two sides of the same coin, is it's really critical to have, first of all, the coverage to see across all of those places, to have the data assets you need, the partnerships that you need to bring in the digital data, be that from walled gardens or partners for linear streaming, combined with a calibration panel to actually take that from machines down to people. And then you need an identity graph in order to take together all of these big data sets that you're bringing together and bring that back to an individual person. Because no offense to a machine or what there is, like, advertisers don't want to reach machines. They want to reach either me or my husband or Andrea, all of which are very different. And it's very, very complicated, newly complicated to serve a consistent need. And that's what Nielsen is really on a path to do with Nielsen One, in bringing together linear, streaming, mobile, all of those things, is creating that seamless comparability, consistent, transparent measurement, which is needed both to fuel the finding of the audiences and the measurement of, did your campaign actually do what you wanted it to?
What I think is interesting, and applaud the work that Deirdre and her company is doing, but if you look at the advertising agencies themselves, which most of the transactions come through, they have spent over $8 billion in the last 3 or 4 years to acquire identity spines, data vendors. Think IPG buying Acxiom, or Publicis buying Epsilon, or Dentsu buying Merkle, which are all identity spines that were built off of direct mail that have U.S. Census data. They're plugging in measurement and plugging in currencies, plugging in inventory into these people-based planning tools. And that is really driving, in my mind, that's the biggest development in terms of advertising and how it's switched from kind of blunt metrics to targeting and attribution, is because the advertising agencies have really modernized how they plan and execute.
An important point there, absolutely. I couldn't agree more with that, is the role and the type of the different identity solutions available that they can play in the ecosystem. So if you talk about Experian or whatever it is, they actually tend to oversample. They're bigger, and that's great for targeting. But then to come down to the precision of who did I actually get? Was it who I wanted to? And how did that work across? You can use them, but they're not really measurement grade. It is Nielsen's point of view, and we think it proves out right. So we partner with all of those folks to get that scale, and we assess the quality of those, and we use those in concert with other really critical assets, which include first-party data, which all of our partners want to bring to bear because everybody knows a ton about their consumers, and they want to bring that to bear in understanding and selling the effectiveness of their platform or of their ability to reach an audience. So we bring that to bear as part of our identity system, as well as, of course, our panels, where we actually have a truth set, not just of our television panel of 40,000 homes, but we have more than 500,000 panelists that we know definitively age, gender, and lots of different metrics about them. So those three things together, I think, are really critical to go from a place where you can target and an agency can reach or look at scale for what are likely to be the people they want to, and then take it down to who did I actually reach? Was it really who I wanted to at a high degree of fidelity?
What I think is going to be really interesting, it will be advertisers and our partners and in the space who will determine this. But you know, I find that measurement, especially in the land of like a Nielsen, things that we've done for a very long time, are very specific to a medium called TV in the way that it existed for linear. And I'm curious to see how this is going to play out in the next couple of years, where YouTube TV doesn't necessarily have to play by the rules that a traditional media publisher has to. It is a very freeing, liberating, and actually much more a smarter business model overall. But it goes back to it's not on the side of the advertiser, because going back to all the fragmentation that happened, their job is to stitch it all together on behalf of the client themselves. So I'm curious to see from where I sit in measurement and research and insights, like our job is to tell a compelling story, yes, as to why our audience and our storytelling and our platform, our mix of media is going to punch above its weight from an investment perspective against our competitive set. But it's also there to help educate on the complexity, right? I mean, when you have 28 networks, when you're linear networks, when you have streaming, you have digital, we have everything from Bleacher Report, we have live sports, we have live news, we have it all. We check the box in so many ways. It's really a more consultative approach to saying, what is it that you're really trying to do? And across all of our impressions, how do we deliver from a top of the funnel down to conversion in the lower funnel? It is really complex. And it's complex right now because consumers are viewing in all of these different ways. And one of the things I think is going to be really fascinating, because I do love linear. I live strictly in the land of linear right now and television, and that's where the bulk of our audience still exists. But I was in streaming 10 plus years ago at Hulu, and it was just like a blip, right? And we saw how quickly consumer behavior shifted when you go from a tablet to a mobile to a large TV screen, and where all that consumption happens on a large TV screen, because the consumer wants the best available screen. And I think that it's going to be a very interesting thing to navigate in the next few years as to how we think about sharing data, how we think about actually on behalf of advertisers or programmers, or are even going back to the privacy compliance, right? And I think it's just going to be it's only going to get messier before it gets easier. But if we look at those who are already in this space for so long, like a Hulu, the virtual MVPDs, I think that they have basically written a lot of the script already. And we're just going to have to essentially follow suit in some way to figure out how do we want to play with our linear. And I think there will always be a linear presence. It's just that at what point does it actually reach mass saturation?
I'd like to jump in, though. I'm sorry, I have to correct that. When I talk about television, or Nielsen talks about measurement of this, it's absolutely not linear. Television, from a consumer perspective, which is where we're all focused, is all of the different ways. And Nielsen One, which we actually announced either yesterday or today, we're launching next week, is all about that. And it's absolutely cross-platform. We have always on measurement with Hulu. We are the ad measurement partner for Netflix. We have always on with YouTube. We have just you name it, and we cover all of the things in our data assets. Not only do we have assets from set-top box and ACR providers, but dirty secret is those things don't capture streaming. They don't. It's a black hole. We bring that to bear as well. So absolutely agree in terms of the mess and the complexity. But with Nielsen One, when we talk about television, we actually don't talk about television. We talk about cross-platform, but we're talking about all of it because the predominant form of consumption is not linear. And therefore, it's not what anybody is trying to achieve anymore on its own. Of course, linear plays a very important role, And it's important to consumers and to businesses as well, but it's absolutely not the play. It's not the strategy, and it's not Nielsen's either.
Great.
I agree. No one needs to, hear that streaming is huge, and the on-demand component of that is driving everything that largely we're looking for at Disney moving forward. And I should add, of course, I'm speaking from my own opinion and not on behalf of the Walt Disney Company. The addition of ads is a meaningful, I think, important step to rounding out the availability to the consumer, where that person is and what their budget tolerates. There is some challenges because a lot of content wasn't produced with ad breaks in mind. So the experience of advertising, I think, is something that needs a closer look across all of the platforms, including Netflix and other places that are adding it in. And anybody who does spend time with YouTube or other platforms can see that it's not exactly always ideal. So there's things that need to be ironed out there. However, it does, it has a big place in the whole pantheon of how people get their content, knowing that really, the streaming is the huge, big trophy on the hill.
Okay, I think we have about 5 minutes left. So this might be a good opportunity to talk about trends you see in the next few years. What's changing? We've talked about a lot of these trends already, but I'll throw one out there. Connected TV platforms, to add to the complexity that we've been talking about. They're another player in the value chain here. So how do you see the industry evolving? If we were to come back in a couple of years and see what's changed.
In fits and starts. So I think the ongoing battle for the initial exposure to your choice of what you're going to go and watch and see, I think, is a real point of ongoing contention. Every time you buy a new television, you're going to get that new connected TV experience, and maybe you'll see a ribbon at the bottom, maybe a big blue screen will come up, maybe you'll have to pick HDMI 1, 2, 3, 4, 7, 12, 42. And then there's the boxes that are going to fight for your attention. I think there's a real opportunity there for someone or some entity to come in and unify it, as there has always been. And that may be involved becoming more of an intermediary or not. And the large companies, not necessarily sure they want to all cooperate in that regard, but maybe they should.
I see a need for simplicity in this ever crowded landscape, and whoever can provide that simplicity. Going back to the ad sales question, NBC Universal Ad Sales, which in my opinion is the best in the business, what they did when you were asking about the advertising landscape, it isn't necessarily that the consumer changed. What the ad sales group tried to do was to follow the trends and to try and bring some order and some simplicity to their choice, right? And by coming up with the one platform, by making it about one brand, one destination to reach your audience and to reach them in every platform possible. Why do I say that? Because I think that the solution to having a crowded media landscape, whether it's in the form of publishers, in the form of connected devices, if there is either a group of individuals or a media solution that organizes that for the consumer. When I talk to friends, they don't know where to find certain content. They don't know how to really work their televisions, I being one of them. And it's just so complex that there's such great content out there. And there's a lot of great information about who's watching it, but there needs to be a better way of connecting that and also a better consumer solution. I think that's a great opportunity, whether it's part of what a large traditional media company adds to its portfolio of products and services, or whether it's an upstart, that's up in the air.
I mean, I think we talked about this, more live events like news and sports moving to streaming. I think it's going to be huge. It's going to be game changing for the consumer overall. And I think that if we can be really smart and thoughtful really at the end of the day about the ad experiences that we put in these streaming environments, it does not have to look like it's always looked with 3 to 4 ads per pod. It can actually just be much more minimal. Those ads could actually have much better impact. And it will be on us to be able to demonstrate that value. But I do think that it will be a really interesting way to think about how we introduce advertising in a world that can really do almost anything when it comes to streaming.
And I really agreed with what you said. The simplicity, both in terms of the user experience, finding content, and how we purchase content, going from all these disparate services to more of a bundle. I see those things as very likely. And then in terms of the simplicity from an industry point of view and how we actually make decisions about ad sales or content distribution or measurement, simplicity is really critical. And with that, I think we're going to see the maturation of identity as well as clean rooms, which are going to be absolutely pivotal to creating that clear view across all of these things. So I think those will happen, and those will be key to 2 or 3 years from now to actually transacting on a cross-media currency, which we believe will be Nielsen One. The other thing I'll say is I'm so conscious too that we talk so much about making real what's already happening for the consumer today in terms of a cross-platform consumption experience. The other thing I think about a lot is young kids do other stuff too that I'm not sure we're thinking about in the same way, i.e. gaming or the metaverse, maybe slower on that, but absolutely gaming. They're already doing that. We're solving a piece of the way they consume media, but their fluidity across those things as sources of entertainment is already here. So I don't think we'll have cracked it in 2 to 3 years by any means, but it's something that I don't think we can start to address in 2 to 3 years, or we are going to be playing catch up for what's rapidly becoming a very powerful set of consumers.
And Jace?
Okay, I'd say automation in the advertising space is moving in the right direction. Things like the Yahoo DSP, which I think is a really good move to connect the household addressable linear space with CTV, being able to suppress duplication to get unique audiences is a really good first step towards automating that experience, that part of the experience.
Great. And yeah, we'll have to have another panel on gaming and social media and other forms of content, but wonderful job. Please join me in thanking our panelists.